So Tom, I'll leave it to you then, and you can take over. I'll stop my presentation and you can take over and you can introduce yourself. You understood everything we talked about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
If you just introduce yourself, who you are, blah, 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 and take it away.
Let me see if I can share my screen.
I inform that they can ask questions during your presentation and that you will participate the last 15 minutes of this session till noon.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right, you should see a blank screen right now.
And you don't have to tell about the first time we met, how angry you were at me.
Oh, let's not go in there. we can keep that for the Q&A.
We can keep that for Q&A. Yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Nice to virtually meet you. Hopefully, in a next iteration, we might be able to actually shake hands and meet face to face. My name is Tom Piens. Some might know me as Reaper. I've been fairly active for the past couple of years on the live community forum and the Slack channels. I think Joran, I heard something about Slack. So there's a community forum on Slack that I frequent daily. I also run my own little web place called Pangurus. That's also my company. I'm the author of Mastering Palo Alto Networks and upcoming Securing Remote Access to Palo Alto Networks, which should be launching the 9th of July. So anyone that's interested, feel free to check that out. I can promise that mastering will get you where you need to be if you don't have a lot of experience. That's actually a book I created specifically for anyone at any level of their career and knowledge of Palo Alto Networks to get going and get good at what they're doing. Today, I have a couple of interesting topics I'd like to share with you. Mostly thanks to Joran, who brought me some nice ideas to share, because there's so many things that you can do with these firewalls that aren't always that obvious. So here's the agenda. I'm going to first take a look at how to actually inject multi-factor authentication in a place where you wouldn't expect it. Secondly, I'm going to demonstrate a couple of log forwarding tricks. That's actually a chapter in the new book as well. There's so much more you can do with log forwarding than just forwarding logs. And then lastly, I'm going to show you guys the application filters, which is something that I've noticed that despite the fact that it exists for many years already, this is one of the first tricks I learned when I joined Palo Alto Networks back in 2010. So it's been around for 11 years now, that not a lot of customers have embraced, and you really should, but I'll show you that in a moment. First off, what if, so my example here is there's a legacy system that resides on my network. I actually created something really old for you to see why you would do this. So the example here is, and this can be applied to many different scenarios, but the idea here is we have a legacy system that isn't able to defend itself from illegal access. So we need to use the firewall to actually create a barrier, but the typical firewall protection mechanisms aren't enough for this. You could create security rules that block access to all different ports, but you will still need to have web browsing or HTTP open. And you could leverage user ID to limit which users have access to the system, but user ID might not be enough. There could be all kinds of reasons why simple user ID, so simply identifying a user and their IP address, is not enough. There could be a legacy HR system that has very sensitive data, or in my case, I set up the company certificate authority, which holds all of my vulnerable certificates, and for reasons unknown, it isn't able to secure itself. It is a simple HTTP interface, so anyone that would want to touch my certificates would be able to do so. So let me show you. This is my little Windows machine. So right here, this is a simple Windows 2010 on my network. And if I open up a browser and I navigate to my certificate server, I'm able to access it. This is not great because it's not SSL, and I can simply do whatever I want. This is very insecure, so I need to make sure that this access is shielded off. For all kinds of interesting political reasons, I'm not able to upgrade my server. So the best way around is to protect my my server through my firewall. So how can we solve that? If we go and look at simple server profiles, right here, there's multifactor authentication, which I've set up with a Duo account. This is a simple Duo implementation. There's no rocket science there. Simply go onto the Duo website and create an access, and this information will be shared immediately. So if you want to play around with this, this is actually free. Next thing we need to do after we create this profile is the typical, you either can use SAML authentication or Radius or LDAP. I set up a simple LDAP authentication to my Active Directory, and then I created an authentication profile. The next step in policies, there's the authentication policy. So if I create a new policy here, from my trusted zone to my untrusted zone for my web server. And let me show you something else as well. 68.27.171. And then my ports. Let me do this a little more quickly. I have my rule here. So my destinations, I added a couple of ports, and then the action here is to use my authentication enforcement, which is located in the objects. So authentication here, there's a couple of steps that you need to take care of. So there's an authentication profile here. There's an authentication profile here that includes my actual LDAP authentication. If I commit this rule, which should go very quickly because this is a VM. And of course, it's going slowly because there's many people watching.
Yeah, that's typically the thing with commit.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, it's got a soul, so it feels that it can be seen. Yeah, and it's great that you mentioned that Duo is for free up till 10 users. So
yeah, that's really great to play around with something before you need to make an investment.
Yeah, and at the home office, just to have it actually in use every day at home office is also very practical, because then you can use it every day, test it, try it, fail with it, and learn it and become good at it at home. So
yeah, and there's actually, while we're making a small commercial for Duo, there's actually a couple of built-in applications that you can launch. They have probably a partnership with a lot of vendors. So you can actually launch a sort of application in Duo that sets up all the necessary authentication and credentials and plugins that you need to connect to a specific device. So even for Palo Alto Networks, there are, I think, 3 different applications you can launch for Global Protect, one for admin access and one for SSL VPN. So there's a whole bunch of free apps you can launch that make plugging in more easy. Because, for example, SAML authentication, if you need to connect a firewall to any SAML provider, it's always a little bit of hit and miss, but because each SAML provider has their own way of implementing a couple of those URLs that you need to add, which for Duo is super easy. Okay, so this rule is now active, which means that if I try to access my website again, I get redirected automatically to my authentication portal. So now, whatever I try to do, 192, if I try to access my certificate server now, the only way for me to get there is if I authenticate to the firewall. So if I now type in my super secret password, this thing is going to send a token to my phone. And if I go and open my Duo mobile app and I click the little approve button, I get access to my website, which is a pretty cool trick. All right. What else is there? Let me show you something really cool. So this is PuTTY. It's used for all kinds of terminal access. And if I 68, you might have noticed that in my security rule, I added a second IP address. There's this one and this one. Access 20. Oh, I'm authenticated, of course. Sorry. Let me change my IP address. I'm already authenticated. There goes my little trick. Sorry about that.
That's the fun part with live demos. So
that's the fun part with live demos all the way. That's
always a risk. Will you show the dynamic part of MFA? With dynamic address group, for instance?
No.
So I can just talk a little bit about it while you troubleshoot this? Yeah. So I'll take it in English since you're here. With the multifactor authentication, you can do it statically, like Tom just showed. But you can just use your imagination, your fantasy, just to create it like you want it, because you have multiple functions in this fantastic toolbox of the Palo Alto Network firewall, and things like identifying suspicious clients for multiple reasons. Let's say a client downloads an unknown file that is by wildfire said to be malicious. Well, that's not good. It could become harm for your company. Then you can dynamically add that client IP to a dynamic address group, and you can use that address object, the dynamic address object, in this authentication policy, saying that for everything this client will do in the future, until someone from support has taken care of it, this client will always be challenged with two-factor authentication for perhaps specific destinations. That's up to you.
Yeah,
so
that's sort of going to plug into the next topic, because there's a little bit of dynamic tagging there as well. Okay, so this should work now. If I try to open up an SSH access, which doesn't have a web interface, I get this. I'm trying to access a protected resource, and global protect is telling me this. So the cool thing is that even though I want the typical way of using captive portal to interrupt people from accessing websites, the same mechanism through global protect can be leveraged to actually authenticate users for other protocols as well. So if you try to remote desktop or SSH or do anything that doesn't have an interface where you can actually log on and provide your MFA credentials, Global Protect is going to jump in and provide this logon page, this logon interrupt for users. If I click this, it's going to actually open up my. This can be applied to. So let me get my words together. This can be applied to any application or any protocol you need to use to protect a certain resource. If you have a telnet server, for example, some old switches and routers may still need to use telnet for something for configuration and admin access. You can actually protect those with this mechanism as well, which is pretty awesome because telnet, as we know, is not very secure. The next thing I wanted to show you is automation through log forwarding. So what can this thing do? Log forwarding is actually a very powerful little tool hidden behind a name that doesn't really give away that it's so powerful. If you go and take a look, we can see that with the panorama, which is something I would recommend, make sure that logs are forwarded to either a panorama or a syslog server or somewhere central so that you have more log capacity and an easier way to create reports and access information that's fairly old. But
so Tom, why is the name on the profile default?
That's a good question. There are that's actually a couple of interesting tricks that you can use to make sure that you don't forget to add stuff. There are two places where you can actually cheat the system. And if you create a profile here that's called default, it's automatically going to add those profiles to new security rules. If I go to my security rules here and create a new one, then you'll see that in action, automatically log forwarding and my security profiles are filled in with the default profile. That's really a neat trick to make sure that, for example, we have a shared firewall at the company I work for right now, where there are a bunch of junior engineers in charge of making changes for customers. It's a shared services firewall. And they're new, so they tend to forget some things every once in a while. And having these in place makes sure that at least log forwarding to our central panorama and security profiles very important, because if you don't add security profiles, you're making a stateful firewall that's not really blocking any threats. So this makes sure that whatever you create always has the default profiles in there.
And it's also kind of important with log forwarding that you actually have logs, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So the security profile groups set up by best practice on all your rules will generate all the logs you can actually get. And based on that, you can do whatever you want with log forwarding.
Yes. On top of your typical log forwarding, you can do a couple of other things as well. So you can either send SNMP traps, you can send out an email, you can send syslog, you can send HTTP. Now, what does this all mean? First off, there's this little field here called filter. And the cool thing here is you can use a couple of default filters. But for example, if you go into your thread log and you use the filter builder, you can start creating all kinds of interesting exceptions or special cases. And then the log forwarding profile changes from a simple log forwarder to a dynamic way of notifying or taking action on a specific event. For example, you could say, for my threads, I want to greater or equal than high for everything that's a threat with a severity greater or equal to high, I can send out an email to my security team, or I can create a ticket with my ticketing system. This is actually going to create an HTTPS connection to my Salesforce server, authenticate as my firewall, it has its own credentials, and send in the logs into a ticket. So my security team is able to take action. They actually get a ticket in the system, they get notified, hey, there's a new ticket, go and check out what happened. And because you have full control over the filter here, you can go fairly deep and very unique to what your needs are. You don't need to just log forward your threads and spam this log forwarding actions for everything. You can perfectly filter out all the things you need to know and want to take action on. The next step, built-in actions, which is a really, really cool feature. Since PanOS 10.0, there's a quarantine option here, which is nice. If you want to take action on users in Global Protect, for example, that are behaving badly or weirdly or strangely or doing anything that matches the filter, they're going to be placed in quarantine. Easier way to go about for myself is you can also add actions here, and there's plenty of options. You can tag any IP address that hits this specific filter. So that means destination address, source address, user or x404 address can be tagged or tag removed. So one example is is to use this for if you need to access to a specific resource, you can use one action to add a tag or another action to remove a tag. So a user can actually, your team can actually use this mechanism as well to sort of log on and log off with a specific tag. Those tags are then added to address objects. So I have a dynamic address group. In this case, I've tagged users and blocked addresses that solely use a tag as a matching system. So the tag I add through my log forwarding is then applied to security role. So there's no IP addresses in here right now until a user is tagged through a log forwarding profile, and then, and only then, this security rule starts to be applied to them. So an example I created for you today is my log forwarding. So I have tagging here. So in this case, my tagging triggers on the wildfire log whenever the verdict is malicious. So wildfire is a great product, but if you are patient 0, there are some concerns. Because patient 0 needs to get the file onto the endpoint before wildfire is able to take action. So best case scenario, your neighbor or someone you don't know gets a malicious file. That file is forwarded to the online cloud sandbox. It's analyzed, a signature is created. The entire wildfire community is notified and gets a signature and is able to block this new threat. But the first person to get the executable or whatever file that was received that's infected actually needed to fully and completely download that file to the endpoint before the firewall was able to send it on to the wildfire cloud, which is a bad thing because now you have an infected file in your network. A way for you to intercept this type of issue, for example, there's many ways. Good endpoint protection and EDR systems is one of them. But just in case, this is a neat little trick you can, for example, use. So when a wildfire threat is detected as a malicious event, my user is tagged. And then a new security rule is applied to those tagged users. So if we go back to my little Windows machine and we simulate a drive-by. Come on, open up. And we simulate a drive-by malware download. first I need to authenticate because this is my only server. I'm poor. Okay, so I have a couple of malware files here. And if I download them, you see that my Windows protection kicks in and tells me, hey, this is an infected file. So in essence, I'm safe, but the firewall let this file come through. Even though there's protections in place that should be able to protect me, but this is an unknown, there's no signatures. The firewall is completely unaware that this is something bad. So I received the file and now I am compromised. If we now wait for Wildfire to kick in. So this file was forwarded to Wildfire and I should be getting a verdict fairly soon. So Joran, feel free to start talking again. This may take a few seconds.
For demo, we typically use the ICAR antivirus because the technical configuration and the methodology is same, but it's faster to demonstrate because then virus is immediately stopped and you can say, this is what happens, and then this is what happened, and it ends up in a threat log, and it will automatically end up in the dynamic address group, and boom. So yeah. But the story here, I totally agree. I mean, Wildfire and non-malware, it's a great example for the example you show, because this should be a reason for log forwarding to create a ticket in the ticket system, because you can have a potentially huge problem in your network.
Yes.
So I use this example all the time for customers, saying, if this happens, you should definitely open a support ticket. And this is what security is about. The firewall is not security, period. But the process we are now presenting is part of security. So I think this is crucial.
It absolutely is. I don't like to use the ICAR file because in the past I've noticed that some things are bypassed due to the fact that the ICAR is a test file.
Yeah.
So I don't like to rely on the ICAR, which is now coming back to
a user forum we had a couple of years ago. We created a web page in Amazon Web Services in the US just for the story and the build-up, and it made it open for everyone in the audience to actually access that and click on a malicious malicious object. And based on that, the firewall could identify it, block it, create an alert. And based on that, instead of opening a ticket, it sent an API message to Philips Hue, a lamp on stage, starting the lid red.
Oh, funny.
But it's just to play with the functionality, the features and function and the capabilities in the product. It's just your fantasy that with the API and all these features and functions, you can do whatever you want. So yeah, you have 2-3 minutes, Tom. So
I'll go.
We can eventually go back to this one afterwards.
Yeah. I'll go and quickly show the application filters. That will only take me a minute or something. So application filters is actually extremely strong. If you open up, it works like a filter, but it automatically adds all kinds of applications to a application group. The neat thing is that if you have no clue which applications to add because there are so many, you can select the applications by behavior. So typically, if you have a new installation and the customer is completely unaware of which applications they need, but you need to have some restrictions, a good way about is to ask them about which types of applications are okay. Which applications are you okay with your users accessing? So typically you have business systems and maybe some collaboration and maybe even media. And then you see that automatically here, these applications are filtered out. So only the specific applications that adhere to these types of behaviors, categories or characteristics here are added. Cool thing is, each time Palo Alto Networks releases new applications, if they match the categories, subcategories, or any of the matching factors you add to your filter here, they're automatically added. So if, for example, tomorrow a new social network starts and the customer wants to block social networks, that new social network is automatically added to the application filter that you are using to block social media. There are a couple of built-in tags as well. For example, Palo Alto Networks is super easy. Which services are they using now? Because every once in a while they add new services, and those services come with their own little applications. So as you can see, there are a lot of Palo Alto native applications right now already. And the only thing you need to do is create an application filter and simply tag the pre-built Palo Alto Networks tag, and it's automatically going to add all of the applications used by Palo Alto Networks. And the next time they launch a new service, that service is automatically going to be added to this list. So you don't need to worry about losing access to a specific update server because they changed the name of the application or they added a new application. Using this filter, it's automatically taken care of, and you don't need to worry that all of a sudden DNS updates or something else stop working. Another example that you can do here is you can exclude applications as well. If, for example, one of those typical things is if you want to create a blocking filter for all the bad applications, anything that has a high risk in this case is going to be assigned to this specific application filter. So all of them are going to get blocked if you add this filter to a security role that has blocking. Now, for example, FTP is also a high risk application because it's not secure, but many companies still use FTP. So what you can do here is, I want to block everything that is high risk except for FTP because I know that FTP is fine. So I'm going to exclude this from this filter. And then simply add this to these security roles and you're all set to go. Let me quickly check. We're 2 minutes over already. It's going fast. Still nothing. Let me ram this a couple more times. Would be nice if I can show you something. No. That's unfortunate. Okay, my time is up. So normally, if Wildfire had detected a threat here, I don't know why it's not working. One of those things with live presentations, I guess. My access to internet is going to be intercepted by URL filtering, and I'm going to get a nice big warning page that a malicious download was detected and that I should reach out to my IT department. Hopefully, I'm going to try to get this to work, and maybe in the Q&A I can still show you the screen. But I'll
That's
release.
perfect, Tom. And as I said before, I mean, for the audience, just please ask questions, comments, etc., etc., and we can eventually take them up. And at the end of this session, when you come back at the last 15 minutes,